Okay, and just ready for you to kick off again.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Mr. Masson. Okay, members, that's us back from getting some private legal advice. Could I just ask Mr. Thompson to read out the section in terms of protected characteristics, please?
Thank you, Kavina. Yes, as we said earlier on, the Equality Act 2010, Section 149, states that public authorities must have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations. It also defines 8 protected characteristics, and it's up to the members here to decide whether any of the characteristics have been met there. Just trying to find the definition of a disability. The Equality Act defines a disabled person as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial or long-term adverse effect on his or her ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And duty of due regard really is just, I suppose, a balancing act. You have to give it a weighting that you think is proportionate, and weigh that up with the other factors you have to consider.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Okay, members, obviously we've had the opportunity to discuss the additional information that's been provided in confidence. So we now need to consider whether now we have the sufficient information in front of us to take our decision today. Councillor Bell.
I actually have one more question, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
Do we know when the pergola and the shed bar arrangement were constructed?
That's okay. I will let you take more questions to Mr. Evans. Sorry, okay. It was just that we had the sufficient from the additional information provided.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, that was maybe confusing. Councillor Hendrickson.
Yes, I have, convener.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Members, as we feel we have sufficient information, we obviously heard from Mr. Evans already about the relevant policy considerations, but we didn't get the opportunity to ask more details around the actual application. So we'll now take those questions. So Councillor Bell, if you'd just like to repeat your question, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. Apologies for my for actually jumping ahead of the process. So the question is, do we actually know when the pergola and shed cum bar were actually constructed?
Yes, Councillor Bell. Going from the letter that's come in from the applicant, Mrs. Fenwick, that refers to the clear-roofed pergola being erected in 2018. It doesn't say anything about the shed, so I'm not sure if that was at the same time or if that was at a later stage.
Okay.
Right, yeah. So can I ask when in 2018 was that?
It just says 2018 in the letter. I'm afraid I'm just going from that.
Okay, because I'm just trying to tie that. I was tempted to try that in with the letter that tells us that the therapy was completed by December 2018. So we don't know.
No, I'm afraid not.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hendrickson, have you got questions for Mr. Evans?
Just one regarding the usage of the shed area. Is the actual use of the shed relevant to this planning application?
Really, Councillor Hendrickson, it just comes down to whether you feel the use of it is within the sort of scope of domestic use of a property, if you like. You can do kind of whatever you like in your garden as long as it is ancillary to your occupation of that house. You're not doing it for commercial purposes, for example, would usually be one of the sort of key things you'd be looking for. So I don't think there's anything to suggest that's the case here. Also a factor in this case, because we're dealing with an issue where mental health has been referred to, and we're thinking of things in terms of protected characteristics, is the extent to which these works have any direct relation to the things that we're talking about as protected characteristics. So just coming back to that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, convener. There's something else came up on the screen there which surprised me.
All right. Hopefully it wasn't me. Okay, members. Any other questions for Mr. Evans? No. See any indications? Okay, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Councillor Hendrickson, do you feel you're in a position to have made a decision, and if you'd like to articulate that?
Yes, convener. I think the additional information that we gathered regarding the medical information that we've received has to me has actually made a difference. And I would have to, based on that and the fact that it does indicate to me that it's a mental health issue, and it is an ongoing mental health issue, which may relapse and then improve. That to me is I think is quite important in this case, especially with what we've been through the last period of time. I know that's not relevant to the planning, but it is relevant to the mental health issues. So I would be minded to retrospectively approve this.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener. Clearly, this protected characteristic of mental health is an acceptable caveat in that the neighbour applied for planning permission, or the neighbour wanted to do similar work and wasn't allowed. So there is a differentiator. I'm not entirely convinced, though, with the medical information that we've been provided, nor with the time that this all aligns in terms of when the various development was constructed. So I'm swithering. I'm not convinced. But clearly the majority would on the committee would actually decide it. But I'm not convinced by the evidence and it being an ongoing issue. I'm not convinced that the nature of the construction is such that someone with mental anxiety and depression would actually need all the facilities that have been constructed. Thank you.
Okay. Again, I thought the information was helpful in allowing us a better insight to the situation. And I can understand, Councillor Bell, where you're coming from in terms of the application of those additional facilities in improving the situation. I suppose one of the issues that was raised in terms of one of the limiters to this individual being able to enjoy life as the way she may wish to, and that perhaps her parents, it's quite difficult because I didn't notice how old the individual was from the information. So again, it's about trying to tie what we saw in the shared elements, such as a bar, to the use for that individual. I mean, I did see exercise equipment as well, so perhaps, if that individual is struggling to go out to to be able to enjoy those things, perhaps that's been added. And again, I think that the issue we have, of course, Councillor Bell, and I think Councillor Hendrickson, you asked a question, or it was maybe Councillor Bell, about when was the shed erected at the rear. It is a very difficult one because, I think if we looked at it on, in terms of purely planning, I think our case officer absolutely made the right recommendation. and we have to have due consideration to the neighbouring properties as well, and the impact that that may well have on their amenity. And but given that there isn't any objection from the neighbouring properties to the application, and having to give due consideration, and having read some of the information within the reports that we got, you know, I can see a case where certainly parts of this application would be of benefit, and depending on the age of the individual, the other part might be of use to them as well. I'm not quite sure. And yeah, and again, it could be about creating a social environment that individual could benefit from if you know, they needed to have people around as opposed to going out. So you know, there's lots of complexities around this. As I say, I wouldn't hesitate if this was purely down to a planning decision to uphold the officer's recommendation. And I think when we're dealing with, you know, it's easy when you've got something like somebody, you know, hasn't got a leg or something like that. You know, it's a very easy disability to be able to look at and understand. You know, in the public documents where we have had the information saying that, you know, it's obviously for the improvement because of a mental health issue, that these things were erected. You know, I am trying really hard to consider that as a, you know, in the context and give it the weight that it deserves as part of the application. This is not an easy one. You know, it really isn't, because, you know, as I say, I am mindful of the impact on the neighbouring property, particularly the one to the left, which, you know, would have an impact on the daylight and obviously some of the privacy, particularly if you're in the bar or the shed bar, call it what you want, you know, looking down the garden, you are looking towards the windows of the neighbouring properties. Mr. Evans, can you remind us of the condition that Environmental Health said that we should attach should we be minded to overturn the application?
It was an advisory note rather than a condition, and I think it's to do with the nature of the material to be burned in a barbecue or a sort of burner of some sort. If you bear with me a second, I'll just look at the original memo to see exactly what that was. But certainly, you know, if members were minded to go in that direction, we could apply that just from the memo.
Yeah, Mr. Evans, again, if we were minded to, is there any other conditions that you might feel that could give us? I think we are minded, obviously, of the individual's protected characteristic. That's obviously what's giving us all the kind of difficulty with upholding the officer's recommendation at the moment. And it's not that we think that the recommendation was wrong, but given that we are privy to more information than the officer was at the time, we're trying to walk that fine line, you know, because we are obviously concerned about setting any sort of precedent. And I know that we can, obviously, there's a difference why we would be doing this one as opposed to any other. But also, I think it's about protecting the amenity of the neighbouring property in particular. Is there anything that we could do, or if we were minded to do that?
The sorts of things that you would be trying to deal with via conditions ordinarily for something of nature might be colouring or painting or stain, or if you felt there was a need for additional screening, that sort of thing. But I think, as you mentioned before, Chair, you couldn't sort of remove parts of the proposal.
You can't.
Conditions.
And the thing is, additional screening, I think, would actually make the neighbouring garden feel even more enclosed and potentially impact more on the light going through. So I don't think that that's probably. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything that was missing that could have given us, you know, swayed us one way or the other. Okay, right, members. I think have given this a good discussion. I think, you know, we all are mindful of what we're dealing with in terms of the applicant's requests. We're obviously mindful of how the officers dealt with the application. and using the, considerations of the planning policies. So I think we've now just got to make a final decision. So I'll just go around this once more. Councillor Henriksson, just to confirm what you're thinking.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I agree with you. This is the difficult one, and I agree with everything that you've said. I think in this case, due to the medical evidence and the protected characteristic regarding mental health, I would be inclined to overturn the officer's recommendation in this case. And I would like to say more, but it's not really relevant to this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Henriksson. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener. Just as an aside, I think the young lady Louise is actually 17.
All right, thank you.
And I worked that out. I'll tell you how I've come to that conclusion. So in the letter in 2018, it says you told me that
You've got to be careful how much we say, because this is
sure.
recorded.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the letter just says you state you had a particular issue, and that goes back to 2015. So if you add to current date, that makes. But of course, this was all constructed in 2018, so that would have made her about 15 then, I think. Anyway, I'm still not convinced that this protected characteristic actually warrants the facilities that have been constructed.
Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Bell, I think not convinced. I think you need to either say you're approving or refusing.
Or refusing.
Okay, so you're upholding the officer's recommendation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it's down to me, right? Okay, folks. I suppose, and I'm trying to find the words, because again, what we've always got to be mindful is if they've sold this house and somebody else moved in, that's there, and it wouldn't be taken away. So we are passing on something that would then be passed on to another household. And then, and we're saying that it wouldn't be acceptable for someone else. And I know we're dealing with what we have at this time in point, but it's all about the legacy and I mean, it was clear from our site visits today, there's obviously been a lot of effort put into the home to make it nice from the external efforts they've put in. And I do understand that perhaps as a parent, they've tried to create an environment that would give her a level of social interaction, perhaps in her home environment, rather than having to go out, and if that's what's limited. So, as I say, given there hasn't been an objection from either neighbours, now again, have they not objected because they feel uncomfortable objecting? Or is it because they genuinely are not objecting? All of this, it runs through your mind when you're considering applications. And having done this for 15 years, it doesn't get any easier. So trust me, it's, I'm not trying to build up any anticipation about my, what I'm going to say. It is simply that, I do find this one particularly difficult because, I have a lot of sympathy for the family. When you're dealing with things like this, and sometimes I think you have to create an environment that works, or you hope will work, to give that sort of level of comfort or environment, whatever you want to say, for your family. And so, whilst I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Bell, I'm not quite sure the relevance of a lot of what's in the shed in terms of a bar. But, as I say, it could be just about creating a social space, for the family. So I will go. I will overturn the officer's recommendation, and it's not a decision I've made lightly. And in fact, I hope the applicant understands that this has been a difficult decision for the LRB. Not because we don't have sympathy, but we have to make the right decision and give recognition to the policies and neighbouring properties. And if there had been, I think, objections from the neighbouring properties, I think we may have found it even harder to be able to overturn the officer's recommendation. So I think I'll conclude in saying that we'll add that additional advisory note that Mr. Evans read out earlier that Environmental Health have suggested, and yeah, we'll approve the applicant the retrospective application. Mr. Evans, is there anything else that you think we need to add?
I think if we could just try and nail down the reasons for the review body's decision, that would be helpful. If we could try and just sort of pick out a few clear points, that would be great. Yeah,
well, I think the trouble we have is we think from a planning perspective, the decision was right, but giving due consideration to the protected characteristics that was presented in the medical information to us, on balance, we feel that has affected our decision in terms of how we apply the policies. Yeah.
So essentially, from my point of view, my advice would be to just go back to the policies that we covered earlier and just quickly run through those in terms of whether you feel like the proposal does or doesn't comply with them. You could come to the conclusion that it doesn't, and in that sense agree with the appointed officer's decision, but you're putting greater weight on the material considerations that we've been advised of from the applicant.
Well, I think actually you've probably said exactly how we feel. I personally don't think it complies with our planning policies. I do think it's overdevelopment of the site. I do think it has a level of impact on residential amenity of the neighbouring property. And in fact, I think everything that the officer has actually identified, I would agree with. But it's just the weight that we have given on the protected characteristics at this stage that has swayed me on this occasion to allow this retrospective application to stand. Councillor Henrickson, is that?
Yes, convener, I agree with everything that you've said. I think if we hadn't had this additional information, I would have gone a different way. And I agree. It is a really difficult one. And I think mental health issues are serious. And there was enough evidence there for me to say that there was on the basis, but only just there was just enough there to overturn the protected characteristic, but it was very close, and I support everything that you've said.
Yeah. Is that okay, Gavin? You're on mute.
Sorry, excuse me. Okay. Yes, that's great. Thank you, members. That gives me plenty to pull together into the decision notice.
Okay,
appreciate it.
You. Perfect. Mr. Masson, you content?
Yeah, I'm content. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Thompson?
Yes, thank you, Convener. All content here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much. As I say, I know this hasn't been an easy decision and application for us to deal with. And I think it has been, as Councillor Henrickson said, very finely balanced. And I appreciate all your time this afternoon. Thank you, members. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, and you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.